All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a seriously dense, high-value strategic briefing drawn from an expert report. And we are looking at the exact under-the-hood mechanisms of digital incorporation and founder mobility. Now, if you're looking for just generic run-of-the-mill startup advice, this definitely isn't it. We're going to focus strictly on the non-obvious details and those implicit assumptions that literally dictate whether a global startup thrives or, hits a massive legal brick wall. So let's dive right in.
To process this effectively, we'll move through a logical funnel. First up, the digital corporate infrastructure. Second, jurisdictional restrictions and compliance. Third, merit-based mobility pathways. Fourth, investment-driven visa strategies. Fifth, the Entrepreneur Parole exemption. And finally, country-specific visa alternatives.
Section 1. The digital corporate infrastructure. So let's look at this first critical phase, establishing a legal footprint from abroad without ever physically crossing a border. According to the analysis, automated remote incorporation follows a highly precise four-step sequential mechanism. Bureaucratic friction that used to take months, it's basically been eliminated. First, you determine the entity structure. Second, distribute the capitalization table. Third, and this is absolutely crucial, you acquire an employer identification number, or EIN. That 9-digit number is the ultimate key that unlocks the final step, which is digital banking and payment processor integration. These automated systems link these steps so tightly now that founders can execute the whole shebang from their living rooms anywhere in the world. But here's the thing. That exact speed creates a pretty dangerous blind spot.
And this brings us to a really important question. What exactly happens when you formed your company, you're waiting on your EIN, you haven't made a single dollar, and you literally have zero expenses? The implicit assumption that almost all founders make is that a newly formed zero-revenue company requires zero compliance action, right? Well, that assumption is a trap. The expert report provides a highly actionable insight regarding this exact gray area. Listen to this. Even if you have absolutely no revenue, the very act of corporate formation is considered a reportable transaction by tax authorities. To satisfy baseline regulatory tracking and avoid some pretty hefty penalties, experts strongly advise filing a consolidated informational report detailing the formation of the U.S. company. You aren't reporting financial information because, well, there isn't any yet, but you absolutely must report the entity's mere existence.
Section 2. Jurisdictional restrictions and compliance. Okay, so the entity is formed. Now we have to talk about the invisible walls. The automated systems checking your eligibility operate on two distinct and frankly often confused mechanisms: citizenship and residency. An absolute block based on citizenship means exactly what it sounds like. A citizen of a restricted country, like Syria for example, is blocked by the system, even if they currently reside in a fully cleared hub like the UAE. However, a residency block is entirely location dependent. So a French citizen residing in Lebanon is blocked. But if a Lebanese citizen moves to the UAE, they are completely cleared. Understanding exactly which variable triggers the block is literally the only way to successfully navigate it.
Section 3. Merit-based mobility pathways. So the corporate infrastructure is established. Let's shift our analysis over to physical mobility. How do founders actually relocate using meritocratic frameworks? We basically have two primary mechanisms here, and contrasting their cause and effect realities perfectly explains why founders heavily lean toward one over the other. Look at the H-1B. It's fundamentally a lottery system. You have maybe a 30 to 40% chance of selection, it runs on a really strict seasonal cycle, and you need a highly specialized degree that perfectly matches your role. The O1 pathway, on the other hand, is purely merit-based. There's no seasonal cap, it allows for continuous, endless renewals, and it looks at your entire professional global career. It doesn't just look at a specific degree, it's all about your track record.
Now, expert analysts highlight some highly non-obvious details about the O1 that pretty much dismantle common assumptions.
Many people think a company has to be, heavily funded or already generating massive revenue to sponsor this visa. Surprisingly, completely false. The sponsoring entity can be incorporated literally 24 hours prior to the application. It can have zero revenue. The founder requires 0% equity to qualify. The entire mechanism hinges solely on hitting 3 of 8 specific government benchmarks. Things like holding critical employment roles, having a high compensation history, or getting significant press coverage.
Section 4. Investment-driven visa strategies.
But, what if your background doesn't quite hit those exact merit benchmarks? Well, let's move into alternative frameworks. These rely on capital deployment rather than individual merit. The crucial point here is the capital threshold. To viably trigger a treaty investor framework, which is often referred to as the E1 or E2, experts generally point to a threshold of $100,000 or more in capital injection. This pathway is actually an incredible option for bootstrapped or more traditional businesses that might fly under the typical venture capital radar.
There is, however, an implicit structural catch to this capital-driven pathway. The funds must demonstrably originate from outside the destination country, and they have to be actively deployed into the business. Plus, unlike the O1, which just requires maintaining your general professional stature, the actual survival of this investment status depends entirely on your operational execution. You absolutely must set and hit strict milestone renewals after a set number of years to prove the business is genuinely generating economic activity. If you don't, you lose it.
Section 5. The Entrepreneur Parole Exemption. Next, we're looking at a highly specialized, somewhat newer legal framework designed exclusively for venture-backed founders. Experts note this completely changes the mobility landscape, but only if you understand its rigid mechanics. Please pay super close attention to this definition, because confusing this exemption with a standard visa leads to catastrophic strategic errors. The Entrepreneur Parole Exemption is explicitly an exemption from the requirement to have a visa. Let me repeat that. It is a specialized authorization granting temporary physical stay. It is absolutely not a formal visa status category. To actually activate this highly specific framework, the absolute mathematical thresholds are super rigid. First, you must have secured a minimum of $250,000. And here is the analytical key, specifically from domestic American investors. This mechanism is purposefully designed to ensure that U.S. capital validates the venture before the government even grants entry. So it shifts the entire burden of proof from your personal merit to institutional validation. The capital injection acts as the ultimate filter. On top of that, the founder must retain at least 10% equity. It comes with a hard maximum cap of 5 years total, but it carries a massive strategic advantage. It explicitly grants spousal work authorization.
But here is the vital cause and effect mechanism you absolutely must understand. Because this parole is an exemption and not a visa status, you don't actually hold a legal status. Therefore, founders cannot legally execute a change of status from within the country. So if you want to shift to a long-term visa or permanent residency down the line, you are structurally forced to physically leave the country to apply. It's a really powerful tool, but it essentially traps you in a temporary loop unless you plan your exit strategy from day one.
Section 6. Country-specific visa alternatives. Let's move to our final tactical category. Too often, global founders completely overlook hyper-specific geographic carve-outs that literally bypass traditional bottlenecks altogether. Your specific citizenship might actually unlock hidden cheat codes in the mobility framework. For example, if you are from Canada or Mexico, the TN framework offers lightning-fast processing. We're talking sometimes under 14 days. If you're from Australia, the E3 is essentially an equivalent to the H-1B, but it completely bypasses that horrible seasonal lottery system. Similarly, the H-1B1 offers citizens of Chile and Singapore lottery-exempt access. These geopolitical treaties can drastically, fundamentally alter your strategic timelines. Strategic synthesis.
Okay, we've covered massive ground here. Let's pull this all together into a final data consolidation so you can make some expert-level decisions. Comparing these frameworks side by side reveals the immediate trade-offs. The O1 triggers off your track record, but the catch is a really heavy evidence burden and no spousal work authorization. The E2 allows your spouse to work but carries serious milestone renewal risks. The parole exemption requires heavy VC backing and allows spousal work, but structurally prevents you from changing status internally. And finally, those treaty options like the TN are incredibly fast, but strictly geographically limited. Which brings us to the ultimate question. The mechanisms of incorporation have been fully automated, yet physical mobility remains deeply tangled in these systemic filters and structural traps. So, based on the rigorous data and parameters we've just mapped out, as automated digital infrastructure outpaces legacy physical borders, is your corporate blueprint built for the mobility of yesterday or the global agility of tomorrow? It's an absolutely critical evaluation every single founder must make. Thank you for joining me for this explainer. Until next time, keep analyzing and keep learning.